I stood at the edge of the porch, watching my only son smile as he said, "I have a new family now." The words didn't crack, didn't hesitate, just landed like a shovel of dirt on a closed grave. Madison looped her arm through his like she'd earned something. The girls called her Mom, and just like that, I was replaced. After the sleepless nights, the scraped knees, the college tuition, I was no longer his mother, just the woman who raised him. So I gave him what he wanted, the name, and took everything else. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The brunch was Darren's idea. A last-minute invite sent as a group text with a time, a restaurant, and no question mark. Eleanor arrived 5 minutes early. She always did. The hostess, too young to know better, smiled at her and asked, "Waiting for family?" She nodded once and took her seat near the window, folding her napkin into neat thirds as she listened to the clatter of silverware and mimosa glasses around her. A gust of laughter burst from a table of college students behind her, but her table remained empty. Darren and Madison swept in together, flanked by the twins, both of whom barely looked up from their iPads. Madison, dressed in a sleek belted trench, greeted Eleanor with an air kiss that never landed. "Mom," Darren said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for coming." She smiled. "Of course." They ordered quickly. French toast for the girls, omelet for Darren, something gluten-free and forgettable for Madison. Eleanor sipped her black coffee and waited. Madison was the first to speak after the food arrived. "So, the girls have some big updates," she chirped, her voice thin and bright like cellophane. "We're starting new traditions." Darren smiled, then rested his forearm on the table, leaning in. "Yeah, we're really building something together now, as a family." Eleanor offered a measured nod, waiting for the point. Madison didn't let the silence stretch. "And we've officially changed the girls' last names to Pierce." The word hung in the air like a wrong note. Eleanor's hand paused mid-air, fork trembling just slightly above her plate. The grits cooled. Her eyes stayed on the twins, who hadn't looked up once. "Of course, we wanted to honor your side of things," Darren added, casual, almost generous. "It just made sense. A fresh start." Eleanor's smile stayed frozen in place, polite and brittle. "I see." Darren kept going, as if narrating a real estate pitch. "It's about continuity. The girls need to feel rooted. And, let's be honest, Pierce carries weight. It sounds like something." Madison nodded, tearing off a tiny piece of croissant. "And they love it. They've already changed it on their school name tags. So cute." "Is that right?" Eleanor said, voice so calm it sliced. There was a pause, the kind that begged to be filled. Darren obliged. "You'll always be part of the past, Mom, but we're focusing on what comes next." Eleanor placed her fork gently back onto the edge of her plate, folded her napkin, dabbed her lips like someone following a script at a formal dinner. "Well then," she said softly, "thank you for the meal." Madison blinked. "You're leaving?" Eleanor stood, smoothing her coat. "Yes, I think I've just been reminded of something important." Darren raised an eyebrow. "Mom, don't be dramatic." She didn't answer. She just turned, heels clicking against the polished tile, each step a punctuation mark. Outside, the September air bit at her skin. The sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of a storm that hadn't broken yet. She slid into her car, ignoring the text that buzzed in from Darren almost immediately. As she pulled out of the lot, she rolled the window all the way down, letting the wind whip across her face. It pulled at her carefully set hair, rustled the scarf at her throat, and stung her eyes until they watered. But she didn't wipe them. Downtown Lexington rolled past in a blur of red brick buildings and weathered awnings. She didn't head home right away. Instead, she turned toward the edge of town, toward the quiet roads where the trees arched over the asphalt like a canopy, leaves just starting to curl with early fall. She let the wind have her, let it slap away the silence she'd worn like armor through brunch. Then, her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Her lips parted, but no sound came. At a red light, she reached for her phone. Not to text, not to call Darren. She opened her contacts and tapped one name, Will Novak. The phone didn't ring. Not yet. But her thumb hovered just above the green button, and her voice, calm and steel-lined, broke the silence inside the car. Legacy over blood, she whispered. Then the light turned green. The house was too still. Not peaceful. Still, like something waiting to be broken. Eleanor stepped inside and set her purse on the entryway table, letting the keys clatter too loud against the antique dish. She didn't take off her coat. The smell of lemon polish lingered faintly in the air, clinging to the hardwood and baseboards. She moved through the hallway with slow, practiced steps, her heels clicking softly across the runner, as if not to wake something buried. In the den, the light shifted across old wood-paneled walls, filtered through half-closed blinds. The late afternoon had turned everything gold, making the dust in the air dance like ash. Her gaze fell to the mantel. There, surrounded by old crystal figurines and a ceramic clock that hadn't worked in years, stood a framed photograph. Darren, 6 years old, cheeks round and sunburnt, standing next to his father in matching flannel shirts. Both were grinning, holding up a lopsided birdhouse they'd built together in the garage. She stared for a long time. A muscle worked in her jaw. Then, gently, almost reverently, Eleanor picked up the frame. Her thumb grazed Darren's smile. It had been real once. She turned the photo face down and set it flat on the mantel, exhaling as though she'd just placed a final stone on a grave. She stood there for another beat, then walked out of the room. In the kitchen, she opened the drawer where she kept her address book. Paper, not digital. It was alphabetical and underlined in blue pen. She turned to the ends, found the name, picked up the landline. 2 rings. Will Novak, came the familiar voice, crisp and even. Eleanor didn't waste a second. I need to make adjustments to the trust. There was a pause, just long enough for her to imagine his expression on the other end. Ellie, he said gently. Are you absolutely sure? Her eyes drifted to the window. The backyard oak was turning, its leaves rusting at the edges. The same tree Darren used to climb barefoot until her husband would call him down, feigning sternness. The swing still hung from one thick branch, unmoving. I've never been surer of anything in my life, she said. No hesitation, not anymore. Will cleared his throat. All right, I can clear my schedule tomorrow morning. You'll come in? I'll be there by 9. Understood. A beat. Ellie, I know this isn't easy. Her voice didn't waver. Easy never built anything worth keeping. She hung up. The kitchen filled with silence again, not the aching kind this time, more like the kind that settles before a storm hits the hills. She walked to the cupboard and took down the teacup she only used for company, not out of sentimentality, but because it reminded her not to fall into routine. She filled it, sat at the counter, and stirred slowly, watching the liquid swirl like something untethered. Upstairs, the hallway lights flicked on as dusk pressed against the windows. She didn't go up. She didn't need to. Everything that had once made this house his voice on the stairs, his shoes by the back door, his Lego bricks in the carpet, was long gone. She wasn't chasing memories anymore. She was naming ghosts, and she'd just decided which ones didn't deserve altars. The cup trembled slightly as she set it down. Her hand had started to shake. But the look in her eyes said something else entirely. Not grief. Readiness. She rose, walked into the den, and picked up a pen from the side table. On the back of an old envelope, she wrote one name in clean capital letters: Naomi Bright. Underneath it, she drew a line, firm, dark, decisive. Then she placed it next to the face-down photo of Darren. The contrast was deliberate and final. The sky hung low over Lexington like a lid pressed too tight on a simmering pot. Eleanor pulled into a narrow spot outside the law office just before 9, her old Buick humming low as she cut the engine. The streets were quiet, shrouded in a gray that blurred edges. Buildings, trees, decisions. She liked it. Days like this didn't ask for warmth. They asked for clarity. She stepped inside and was greeted by the same secretary who'd worked there for decades. Janice, always in cardigans, always with something sweet tucked in her desk drawer. Today, Janice offered a tight smile and a nod. No small talk, just, "He's ready for you." Eleanor nodded and walked through the short hallway that smelled faintly of copier toner and old pine. Will's door was half open. He rose as she entered. "Ellie." "Will." She didn't sit right away. She scanned the room. Same dark-paneled walls, same tidy desk with zero clutter. A framed photo of his son, who'd gone off to the West Coast years ago, still sat beside his monitor, untouched by time. He gestured to the chair. "Coffee?" She shook her head. "Let's begin." Will slid a manila folder across the desk, already opened to the relevant page. "This is the current structure. Darren is named as primary heir. Full control of the estate, assets, charitable funds, and legacy properties, including the house." Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd already buried the part of her that would have reacted to hearing it laid out like that. She leaned forward, eyes on the page. "Remove him." Will's brows lifted. "Fully?" "Yes." He hesitated, not out of resistance, but respect. "Then we'll need a new beneficiary. I can have the language adjusted. Bypass clauses, standard contest safeguards." "It's Naomi," she said, voice flat and even. "Everything." Will blinked, then leaned back slowly in his chair, watching her. "That's not just a shift in logistics, Ellie. That's a statement." "She's been more family than he's been in years," she said, then added after a beat. "And she knows how to carry a name without turning it into a brand." He exhaled softly, nodded. "Legally, it's clean. She's an adult. Sound mind. No conflict of interest. We'll tighten every clause. Full protection from contest or challenge. I'll build in a no-contact clause, if you want it." Eleanor tilted her head. "You think he'll fight it?" Will gave a small, dry laugh. "You and I both know he'll try." She sat back, folded her hands in her lap, and stared out the window at the gray sky. "Then make sure he loses before he starts." Will leaned forward, already scribbling notes on a legal pad. "I'll have the draft to you by tomorrow. You'll need to sign in office for the final version. We'll also reissue the title deed for the house under the new trust name." He paused, then looked up. "You understand what this means, Eleanor. This isn't symbolic. This is permanent." She met his eyes. "That's the point." A quiet settled between them. Not awkward, solemn. As if something had been buried in the space between his desk and her chair. Something they both understood wasn't coming back. Will closed the folder. "All right, let's proceed." Eleanor stood, smoothing the sleeves of her coat. "Thank you, Will." He gave a quiet nod. "Your husband would be proud of how you're handling this." She gave him a small, sad smile, more memory than agreement, and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, she paused. "He always said names were like blueprints," she said. "You pass them down, but they only mean something if someone's willing to build on them." She opened the door. Naomi knows how to build. The door clicked shut behind her. Outside, the clouds were still thick, but a wind had picked up, stirring the flags on the courthouse next door. And miles away, across town, Darren Pierce was sitting in his corner condo, drinking espresso and rehearsing a business pitch. Utterly unaware that the legacy he'd been counting on had just been signed away behind a walnut door he'd never been invited to walk through. The Fayette County Clerk's office smelled faintly of printer ink and wet umbrella fabric, neutral and forgettable, like it had been built to erase feelings rather than stir them. Eleanor stepped up to the counter wearing her late husband's old camel coat. The shoulders sagged a bit, but she liked the weight of it. Beside her, Naomi held a to-go coffee tray in both hands, balancing a latte for herself and an herbal tea Eleanor hadn't asked for, but would drink anyway. "Here," Eleanor said quietly, sliding a slim folder across the counter to the clerk. "Quit-claim deed. It's ready to file." The clerk, mid-30s, efficient, a small gold nose ring barely visible, nodded. "Give me a second to scan it in." She took the folder without looking up. Eleanor stepped back, glancing toward the hallway of records, where decades of property transactions were stored in steel cabinets that hummed when touched. Her name had lived in those drawers since the mid-80s, filed neatly beside her husband's. They'd signed their first deed in ink thick with trust and expectation. The woman typing at the computer cleared her throat. "Still lists Darren Pierce as contingent beneficiary," she said, eyes scanning the screen. "Not anymore," Eleanor replied, voice steady as granite. Naomi handed over the tea without a word. She hadn't spoken since they walked in, but her presence was grounded and sure. Her heels were scuffed and she wore no makeup, but she held herself with the kind of quiet dignity that made people lower their voices when she entered a room. Eleanor looked over. "You nervous?" Naomi's eyes flicked toward the counter, then back. "Should I be?" A faint smile played at Eleanor's mouth. "Not at all." The clerk turned the monitor slightly and gestured for Eleanor to verify the changes. "The house will now be titled to the Bright Pierce Trust. Is that correct?" "Yes," Eleanor said, eyes locked on the screen. She pulled a pen from her purse. "And please remove Darren's name entirely. No secondary rights, no survivorship clauses. It's no longer his." The clerk blinked, just for a second, but then nodded and resumed typing. Naomi took a slow sip of her latte, eyes wandering over the public notices pinned on the bulletin board nearby. Birth announcements, foreclosure warnings, missing pet flyers, lives shrinking and expanding on 812x11. "You ever think," Naomi said softly, not quite looking at Eleanor, "how a name on a paper can mean more than years of someone's voice in a room?" Eleanor looked at her. "I used to." A beat passed. "Now I know it." The clerk reached for the metal stamp. With a dry clunk, she pressed it into the last page, raised letters embedded cleanly into government-grade paper. "Final. Irreversible." "Recorded," the clerk said, sliding the updated title back across the counter. Eleanor took it without ceremony, just a quiet intake of breath. Deep, controlled, and final. Like closing the door on a house you know you'll never live in again. As they walked out, Naomi held the door for her. Outside, the air was brisk and sharp with the scent of city rain. They stood under the narrow overhang, listening to the wind whip through the courthouse flags. "Thank you," Naomi said, still holding the now empty tray. "For what?" Eleanor asked. "For not letting him ruin the house," Naomi said. "Or what it means." Eleanor looked down at the deed in her hand. The name at the top no longer matched her son's. And yet, for the first time in years, it felt more like home. She folded the document carefully and tucked it into her purse. "The house," she said quietly, "always goes to who respects it." They stood there in silence for a moment. Both women watching the drizzle begin to gather along the pavement. Naomi adjusted her coat, then offered her arm. Eleanor took it. And across town, in a corner office full of unearned confidence, Darren Pierce was clicking through real estate listings, daydreaming of the home he thought would one day be his. He didn't know he'd just been erased from it. The glow of Eleanor's phone lit the darkened living room like a quiet trespass. She sat in her husband's old leather armchair, one lamp on behind her, casting everything else into long shadows. The fire was out, but the scent of wood smoke lingered in the brick hearth like memory. The screen showed a single notification from a platform she barely used. Darren had tagged the Pierce Estate's location in a photo. Curious, she tapped. The image was flattering, taken from the back garden just after a rainfall, the late afternoon light catching the windows like amber. Her house, still hers, looked like something out of a luxury real estate brochure. But it was the caption that stilled her. Someday this beauty is all mine. Family legacies matter. She stared at it. No reaction, no flinch, just a slow blink and a tightening around the corners of her mouth. Then, calmly, deliberately, Eleanor took a screenshot. She didn't comment, didn't message. She simply locked the screen, set the phone on the side table, and reached for her tea. Still warm. Across the room, the grandfather clock ticked like an old friend who had grown tired of reminding people of the time. The phone buzzed again. Not Darren this time, Will Novak. She answered on the first ring. All transfers are finalized, he said. The house, the estate accounts, the charitable endowments. Naomi is now the primary, and only, heir. Eleanor closed her eyes for a second, letting the words settle like fresh paint on old wood. Thank you, she said quietly. No issues at the clerk's office? None, she replied. Naomi was with me. I'm glad, Will said, his voice softening. It's done then. It is. She hung up before either of them could say something sentimental. Later that night, when the sky had gone from stormy gray to starless black, Eleanor stood in the foyer wrapping a scarf around her neck. She wore gloves. Not because it was cold, but because the letter she held in her hand deserved to be delivered without fingerprints. The envelope was plain, cream-colored, unsealed. Inside, a single card, handwritten in her clean, decisive cursive. The future belongs to those who protect it. She didn't sign it. There was no need. Darren's building downtown was the kind that tried too hard. Glass-heavy, overlit, with a concierge desk that mistook trendiness for class. The young woman at the front glanced up as Eleanor walked in. Can I help you? No, Eleanor said simply, already sliding the envelope into the outgoing resident mail slot. He'll know it's for him. Back outside, the wind had picked up again. She stood under the cold glow of the streetlight, watching a man across the street fumble with his phone, laughing too loud into the night air. She remembered when Darren used to laugh like that, freely, without calculation. Before image replaced instinct, before ambition replaced affection. She turned and walked back to her car. Upstairs, in his high-rise condo, Darren Pierce was in the middle of pouring a third glass of wine when a notification chimed on his phone. One of Madison's friends had commented on his photo. Manifest it. He smirked, satisfied. Oh, I will. He never noticed the sealed envelope being slid into his box downstairs. He never considered that the house he'd just posted was no longer his future, but someone else's present. And he had no idea that for the first time in his life, his mother hadn't just ignored his arrogance. She'd buried it. The sound of tires on gravel came fast and sharp, spitting bits of stone into Eleanor's flower beds. Naomi heard it first. She stepped onto the front porch just in time to see Darren's silver Range Rover screech to a halt at the base of the circular drive, half on the grass. He was already out of the car. storming across the yard. Fists clenched, cheeks flushed, a rolled-up piece of paper in one hand like it had tried to burn his palm. The front garden, normally silent, orderly, breathing with trimmed hedges and early fall roses, was suddenly filled with noise. "What the hell is this?" Darren shouted, holding the paper up like a weapon. "Huh? You sneak around, you restructure the entire estate, and you don't even have the decency to pick up the phone?" Blinds in the neighboring houses quivered, small movements behind slats and curtains. A Labrador barked 2 doors down, then went silent again. Eleanor stepped outside, calm as glass. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't quicken her pace. She walked down the brick path toward the commotion like she was headed out to trim the rose bush. Naomi stayed by the porch column, watching, alert, silent. Eleanor stopped a few feet from her son. She was holding a small envelope, white, pristine, with his full name written in her hand, Darren William Pierce, across the front. She offered it out. Darren didn't take it. He was still breathing hard, eyes wild. "You went behind my back, Mother." "I went through the front door," she said calmly, "with my name on the title and my lawyer on record." "You know what this looks like?" Darren hissed. "You cut me out like I was some intern who spilled coffee on your will." "No," she said, setting the envelope on the stone garden wall between them. "You did that yourself when you gave away the name your father built like it was a party favor." "That's my name." She looked at him then. Really looked. His face was red and drawn too tight. The sharp navy suit jacket was creased in all the wrong places. There was a veneer of wealth on him, but not weight, not substance. "You gave your name to strangers," Eleanor said, voice like polished steel. "Now, so have I." Darren looked like he'd been slapped. He grabbed the envelope from the wall and tore it open. Notarized trust documents. A 1-page summary of the new estate plan. The amended will. The re-recorded deed to the Pierce estate. All with signatures. All legal. All final. Darren's hands trembled. "You're erasing me," he said, louder now, desperate. "From everything." "No," Eleanor replied. "I'm putting your name where it belongs, in the past." "You don't get to decide who carries our legacy." "I do," she said, "because I'm the one who protected it when you walked away." He looked toward the porch, as if seeing Naomi for the first time. Her face didn't change. She didn't speak. "You think she deserves this?" he barked, gesturing at the house. "Her?" Naomi didn't answer. She just met his gaze and didn't look away. Eleanor's voice stayed even. "She didn't claim it. She earned it." Darren stood there, papers shaking in his hands, rage burning off him in uneven waves. Then something cracked, visibly. He threw the documents to the ground. They scattered across the grass like leaves in a bad wind. "I hope you choke on this," he spat. Eleanor didn't blink. Instead, she stepped forward and picked up the page listing the new trustee. She dusted off a corner, folded it cleanly, and tucked it back into the envelope. Then she looked at him and said, with terrifying stillness, "You were given everything, and you treated it like it was waiting for you." She turned and walked back to the porch, slow and composed. Naomi opened the door. Darren stood alone in the garden, chest rising and falling, hands empty. A single page, the revised will summary, fluttered across the driveway and landed at his feet. He didn't pick it up. He just stood there, in the same yard he used to run barefoot through as a boy, watching the only home he'd ever assumed would be his close its door. The attic was warmer than it should have been for October. Dust rose in soft clouds with every opened box, floating in the shafts of light coming through the narrow dormer window. Naomi wiped her palms on her jeans and crouched beside an old wooden trunk marked Darren. Age 5 to 12 in faded Sharpie. Eleanor sat cross-legged on a nearby blanket, flipping through a cracked photo album, her gloves abandoned on the floor beside her. "Do you want to go through this one?" Naomi asked, her voice soft, like she wasn't sure if opening the box would set off a bomb. "No," Eleanor said without looking up. "Start pulling things out, we'll be quick." Naomi hesitated, then carefully peeled back the lid. Inside, old trophies with tarnished plates, a worn baseball mitt, a blue ribbon from the 1994 county spelling bee, a crumpled drawing of a stick figure family labeled me plus mom plus dad, my dog Spot. There was no dog named Spot. Naomi held the paper out, unsure. Eleanor looked over, then nodded once. "Toss it." The box filled quickly. Donation, donation, trash, donation. Every few items Naomi hesitated, but Eleanor never did. Her movements were clean, precise, not rushed, deliberate. She wasn't purging memories. She was choosing what deserved to remain. When they reached the last photo album, Naomi slowed. A snapshot had slipped loose between the pages. Darren, maybe 16, standing with Eleanor's husband in front of the freshly painted house. The two were smiling, arms slung around each other. The porch was covered in autumn leaves, the same way it had been just last week, when Darren stormed across it yelling like a stranger. Naomi looked at the photo, then at Eleanor. She didn't say anything. Eleanor stared at the picture for a moment. Then she extended her hand, palm up. Naomi passed it to her. Eleanor studied it. The memory wasn't painful exactly. It was hollow. Like revisiting a book she'd once loved and realizing the story didn't hold up. She folded the photo once, then again, pressed the crease firmly, then set it in the pile without ceremony. That one goes. Downstairs, the garden she'd once tended alone was now being pruned by hands that understood its shape. Marge Wilson stood among the rose beds, wearing denim overalls and a wide-brimmed straw hat she claimed was strictly functional. She clipped back dead growth with cheerful efficiency, pausing only to yell over her shoulder, "Ellie? These hydrangeas look like they finally remembered who they belong to." Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, brushing attic dust from her arms. "Let them bloom, Marge. They've earned it." Marge looked up, grinned. "So have you." Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat at the dining room table with a checkbook she hadn't used in months. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon. Naomi had tried baking, and the results were still cooling in the kitchen. The check was made out to Lexington Girls Preparatory School. In the memo line, she wrote, "Pierce Family Legacy Endowment, in honor of Harold Pierce." Her husband's name, written in ink that felt like closure. Naomi walked in carrying two mismatched mugs. She set one down, then glanced at the check, and stopped. "You're doing this in his name?" she asked. Eleanor nodded without looking up. "He believed in strong girls. Even before he knew we'd have to raise one." Naomi didn't speak. She sat down slowly, reading the dedication again. Her throat tightened. Eleanor looked up. "You okay?" Naomi wiped at her eye quickly. "Yeah, just—" She stopped, laughing once under her breath. "He never even met me." Eleanor tilted her head. "Doesn't matter. He'd have liked the way you stand your ground." Naomi folded the check into its envelope. "I hope so." Eleanor reached across the table, resting her hand on Naomi's. "He would have loved you." The words weren't dramatic. They were quiet, unforced, and they landed with the weight of truth. Outside, the roses had begun to open again, one by one. The house smelled like rosemary, browned butter, and something slightly burned. An honest dinner. Naomi moved between the kitchen island and the stove in socked feet, hair up, flour streaked across one cheek like a battle mark. Her friends, A warm mix of 20 and 30-somethings from the local rec center and Naomi's nonprofit circles, had arrived over the last hour with mismatched Tupperware and bottles of wine they admitted were cheap. Eleanor stood at the edge of the dining room, watching it unfold. Someone was showing someone else the old piano in the parlor. Someone else was laughing too loud on the stairs, and someone was already asking if they could move in permanently. Eleanor's plates, the good china, were being used without apology. "Ellie," Naomi called from the kitchen. "Can we serve from the counter, or do you want it plated?" Eleanor blinked out of her quiet observation. "From the counter's fine." "You sure?" Naomi asked, already arranging salad in a wide ceramic bowl. "Yes," Eleanor said. "It's a table, not a museum." Will Novak arrived just as everyone was sitting down. He looked slightly overdressed in his gray blazer, holding a bottle of something from the goods shelf and a paper-wrapped bouquet he clearly didn't know what to do with. "You're late," Eleanor said as he stepped through the front door. "I brought hydrangeas," he said, sheepish. "They're upside down," she replied, taking them anyway. Will surveyed the house as he shrugged out of his coat. The sound of forks clinking and voices overlapping drifted from the dining room. "You haven't had a full house like this in a long time." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She set the flowers in water, wiped her hands, and gestured for him to follow her. By the time they reached the table, Naomi had just sat down between two friends, one wearing a denim jacket, the other with a visible arm tattoo of a turtle carrying a bouquet. The mood was light, easy. There were no forced smiles, no legacy weight dragging the walls down. Will nodded slightly, as if to himself. He'd like this. Eleanor looked at him. "You mean Harold?" Will nodded again. Eleanor didn't speak. She didn't need to. As the meal unfolded, stories were traded. Naomi talked about mentoring girls at the shelter. Someone shared a disastrous baking story. Another chimed in with a chaotic road trip memory. Laughter rose easily, bouncing off walls that had once held nothing but silence and restraint. Naomi leaned toward Eleanor at one point, half whispering above the chatter. "You okay with all this noise?" Eleanor arched an eyebrow. "I used to live in a house full of loud men and heavier footsteps. This is welcome." Naomi grinned and passed her a fresh biscuit. As the evening slowed, someone put on soft music in the background, the kind meant to fill the space without taking up any of it. A few guests headed out early, offering hugs and promises to bring better wine next time. Eventually, it was just Naomi, Eleanor, and Will, settled into the den with low light and full bellies. The fire Naomi had built crackled gently, its glow casting moving shadows across the floorboards. Naomi stood to poke at the logs, and when she sat back down, she sighed and leaned into Eleanor without thinking. Her head rested against Eleanor's shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, reaching for her tea, "can you hand me the blanket?" Silence. Will looked up. Naomi froze. Eleanor passed the blanket without saying a word. Naomi tucked it around her legs, then sat a little straighter. "I mean," Eleanor touched her arm. Not a stop. Not a correction. A quiet, steady confirmation. Naomi swallowed. "Mom," she said again, this time clearly, intentionally. Will smiled gently and looked away, giving the moment space. The fire cracked again. Eleanor's voice came almost as a whisper, like something unsaid for too long had finally found the air it needed. "This house finally feels full." The letter came certified, addressed in stiff legal font to Eleanor Pierce. Will brought it over himself, walking into the sun-dappled kitchen just as Naomi was trying to bake again. Something cinnamon-based, this time less burnt. Eleanor didn't need to open the envelope to know what it was. "He filed," Will said, already pulling out his reading glasses. "Petition for invalidation of the amended trust. Claims undue influence and, wait for it, Concerns about your mental capacity. Naomi blinked, hands still dusted with flour. Are you serious? Will laid the document flat on the counter, his voice dry. As a probate lawyer, I almost admire how predictable it is. Eleanor didn't flinch. He can't win. No, Will agreed. But he can waste your time if we don't crush this fast. They moved quickly. Will coordinated evaluations from 2 licensed psychologists Eleanor had worked with on community boards, both certified, both well-respected, and both more than willing to speak to her clarity of mind, judgment, and emotional stability. She passed every test. Clean scores, sharp recall, no signs of coercion, dementia, or cognitive impairment. Naomi watched her walk out of the final assessment with her shoulders straight, her heels steady on the linoleum tile. She looked more competent than the doctors, one of the assistants whispered to another behind the desk. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, downtown, in one of the smaller civil chambers that usually handled business disputes and estate hearings. Madison showed up in head-to-toe beige, her mouth pulled into a line that looked more like branding than grief. Darren wore a black blazer that didn't quite fit around his shoulders anymore. They sat at the petitioner's table, arms folded, eyes scanning the courtroom as if searching for someone to impress. Eleanor entered in a navy suit and a brooch shaped like a compass. Naomi sat behind her, quiet and watchful. Will took his place beside her, legal pad ready, though he didn't expect to need it. Judge Cynthia Alvarez, a woman known for her sharp rulings and zero tolerance for theatrics, took the bench and called the hearing to order. Darren's lawyer began to speak, reading from prepared notes about Eleanor's declining state and recent behavioral inconsistencies, citing her uncharacteristic generosity toward a non-relative. He stumbled when Judge Alvarez cut in. "Counselor, do you have any professional evaluations to support this claim?" Darren's lawyer hesitated. We believe further inquiry would reveal." Will stood, calm as ever. "Your Honor, we've submitted 2 independent evaluations, both affirming Mrs. Pierce's mental clarity, autonomy, and intent. We've also submitted the timeline of all estate amendments, which demonstrate consistency and lack of outside pressure." Alvarez didn't even glance at the documents. "I read them. They were thorough." Madison's hand found Darren's under the table. Will continued. "We also have character references from the family physician, her church treasurer, and the headmaster of Lexington Girls Prep." The judge looked at Darren, then Madison. "Mr. Pierce, is there any evidence you'd like to submit beyond your personal disappointment?" The silence that followed was brutal. Darren tried to speak. "Your Honor, she's being manipulated, she's—" Judge Alvarez raised a hand. "This hearing is not about entitlement. It's about legality." She turned to the clerk. "Dismissed. Petition denied with prejudice." The gavel struck once, clean, final. 15 minutes, start to finish. As Eleanor stood to leave, she didn't look back. Madison, red-faced, leaned toward Darren, her whisper sharp as a blade. "You said this would work." Will turned just enough to catch Darren's eye, and then he smiled. Not smug, not cruel, just decisive. "Maybe read the law next time," he said. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and bright, the first real autumn breeze rolling through the street. Naomi offered Eleanor her coat, but she waved it off. "I feel warm," Eleanor said, and she did. Will walked beside them. "That was swift." "It was overdue," Eleanor replied. Behind them, the courthouse door clanged shut. The family history binder sat on the dining room table, its leather cover worn, corners frayed with time. Eleanor opened it slowly, her fingers moving with the reverence of someone unthreading a legacy. Not because she wanted to preserve it, but because she was ready to correct it. Each page was handwritten. Genealogies, wedding announcements, yellowed obituaries, photos glued in place with brittle adhesive. This was the record Harold had started when they were newlyweds, long before Darren's birth had become the centerpiece of every page after page. Until now. Naomi stood at the counter preparing tea, glancing over occasionally but saying nothing. Eleanor paused at a photo of Darren's high school graduation, centered on a page like a crown jewel. Underneath, her late husband had written, "Our only son, the next steward of the Pierce name." She stared at the words for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached for the correction pen Will had handed her earlier that morning. Legal grade, archival ink. She drew one neat line through the sentence, then another through Darren's name. Her hand didn't shake. When she looked up, Naomi was watching her. "Are you sure?" Naomi asked. Eleanor nodded. "This isn't erasing the past, it's cleaning up the mess it made." By noon, the paperwork was filed with the Lexington Historical Society. Darren William Pierce was formally removed from the Public Family Archive entry, replaced with a sealed notation. Status revoked by a state authority, 2025. At the same time, Naomi clicked submit on her own paperwork. A new hyphen appeared across government forms and bank accounts alike. Naomi Bright Pierce. It didn't come from inheritance, it came from choice. The following weekend, the Lexington Gazette featured a full-color photo on the front of their Sunday insert. Local matriarch funds 2.5 Pwedseter endowment to girls' education in honor of late husband. The article was glowing. They had used a tasteful photo of Eleanor on the back porch, flanked by early fall roses and Naomi beside her, smiling in sunlight. The piece mentioned the foundation's mission, Eleanor's years of community work, and, most notably, her commitment to building a new kind of legacy through chosen family and education. They never mentioned Darren, but he saw it. Across town, in his condo that now felt too modern and too sterile, Darren scrolled through the article on his phone. He clicked the comments section. All praise, all admiration. He typed a response. "She's not who she pretends to be. You people have no idea." When he hit send, a message flashed. "Comment blocked. You've been restricted from this account." He refreshed. Tried again. Nothing. He stared at the error for a long time, like it had personally betrayed him. Then he set the phone down and walked out to the balcony. Below, the city moved along without him. Cars, conversations, lives with no memory of his name. Back at Marge Wilson's kitchen table, the Gazette lay open beside a plate of lemon bars. "Listen to this," Marge said, adjusting her glasses as she read aloud. Eleanor Pierce's gift honors her late husband, Harold Pierce, and their shared belief that blood may start a family, but love is what builds one. She looked up, a grin creeping across her face. They even got the quote right. Eleanor sat across from her, calm, unhurried, a teacup in one hand. "It's not about headlines," she said. "Sure it's not," Marge teased, folding the paper like origami. "But it's nice when the world finally sees what you've always known." Naomi walked in a moment later, carrying a binder of scholarship applications. "Mom," she said casually, like she'd said it her whole life, "I think we're going to need more chairs for the first board meeting." Eleanor took a long sip of her tea before answering. "Then we'll make room." The brass nameplate came down on a Wednesday morning. The screws were rusted, and the plaque was heavier than Naomi expected. She gripped the edge with a gloved hand, steadying it while Marge handed her the drill from below. "You sure you don't want me to do it?" Marge asked, eyeing the wobble. Naomi smiled. "If I mess it up, Mom will pretend not to notice. If you mess it up, she'll make you redo the entire porch." Marge snorted. Fair point. With a final tug, Naomi pulled the plate free from the brick archway over the main entrance. She handed it down carefully. Marge flipped it over. "Pierce Estate, Esther 1983. letters engraved deep, polished by decades of sun and rain. She ran a finger across the words. Lotta history in this metal. Naomi held up a new sign. Lighter, matte black, modern serif font. Elegant but not cold. The bright legacy home. She climbed the ladder again and centered it on the screws. It fit perfectly, like it had always belonged there. Inside the house, Eleanor sat at the long oak table in the study, papers spread out before her, each bearing the crisp letterhead of the Harold and Eleanor Bright Foundation for Mentorship and Growth. At the bottom of the stack sat a single deed transfer. A portion of the estate grounds, 2 acres of garden and the detached guest house, was now legally gifted to the foundation. Its mission: mentorship for underserved girls aged 12-18. No inheritance strings, no fine print, just space to grow. Will had already reviewed and notarized the paperwork. All she had to do was sign. Eleanor reached for the pen and paused. Outside, through the study window, Naomi was stepping down from the ladder, hands on her hips, face turned up toward the new plaque. A breeze caught the edge of her coat. Eleanor smiled, then signed. The following week, a group of 15 girls arrived in a yellow minibus with Lexington Youth Mentorship painted in peeling navy on the side. They stepped off in waves, full of chatter and cautious excitement. Some wore earbuds, some wore chipped nail polish. Most looked around the estate like they didn't know where to look first. Naomi greeted them at the gate with clipboards and juice boxes. Eleanor waited in the garden, already kneeling beside the first row of soil beds she and Harold had dug themselves 40 years earlier. "Come on in," Naomi called. "She's got gloves and tools ready." The girls approached slowly. One asked if they had to get dirty. Another said she'd never touched a real rosebush before. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She held up a pair of gloves and patted the empty ground beside her. "They won't bloom for you until you earn their trust," she said, smiling faintly, "just like people." That made one of them, tall, braid down her back, kneel beside her. Eleanor handed her a trowel. By the end of the afternoon, every single girl had her hands in the soil. Dirt under nails, hair tied up, questions flying. Eleanor answered everyone, patient and firm, correcting posture, praising precision. Not with coddling, with care. Naomi took photos throughout the day, snapshots of muddy fingers, sunlit laughter, and Eleanor gesturing to a thornless hybrid rose she'd bred herself decades ago. She labeled each image on her laptop that night, then printed them on glossy paper. She placed them in a scrapbook titled "The First Seeds." Later, as twilight cooled the air, Eleanor walked the garden paths alone. The new plaque caught the last of the sun's light, casting shadows onto the front steps. Marge stood near the gate, arms crossed, watching as Eleanor adjusted a crooked stem with gentle fingers. "You really renamed it," Marge said. Eleanor looked up. "No, I corrected it." Marge grinned. "You think he saw the article?" Eleanor didn't ask who she meant. "He'll hear about it. Somehow." As she stepped back inside, wind brushed against the windows. Warm at first, then sharp, almost electric. Far off, in a condo growing colder by the week, Darren opened his inbox to find a forwarded news clip and a subject line that stopped him cold. Bright legacy home featured in local spotlight. Will Novak didn't even knock. He walked straight into the kitchen with a folder under one arm and a bakery bag swinging from the other. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "What now?" Naomi, elbows deep in flour and sugar, looked up from the mixing bowl. "Is that for us? Or is it legal bribe material again?" "Both," Will said, placing the bag on the counter and flipping open the folder with practiced ease. "Second petition. Darren filed it last week. Attempted contest on the grounds of emotional coercion and undue alienation of familial entitlement." He glanced up. He really likes that word. Entitlement. Naomi snorted. Sounds like he found a thesaurus before hiring a new lawyer. Eleanor didn't bother looking at the papers. Let me guess. Dismissed? Will nodded. Denied. Again. This time by a different judge. She called it an audacious misreading of probate law and warned his counsel not to waste the court's time with future filings. He slid a single page forward. We're officially sending the final cease and desist. Eleanor took the page and signed it without hesitation. Any fallout? She asked. Will paused. Financial? He's drowning in fees. Madison was listed as a co-filer on the original paperwork, which means she's on the hook for the expenses too. I wouldn't be surprised if they start liquidating soon. 3 days later, Darren's name appeared in the public bankruptcy filings. The condo. Gone. 2 of his smaller businesses, branding consultancies that mostly relied on pretense, folded quietly in the middle of the night. And Madison? She moved faster than the markets. Within hours of the bankruptcy notice, her Instagram profile shed his last name. Every post tagged with Comar, Pierce Life, or Legacy Loading vanished. Anniversary photos, house tour reels, soft filtered brunches on the condo balcony, all gone. She kept her influencer page, though. Now titled, A New Chapter Madison. Back in the kitchen, Naomi shoved a tray of crooked sugar cookies into the oven, slamming the door shut with the satisfaction of someone releasing a small grudge. These are going to look like confused pancakes, she muttered, wiping her hands on her apron. Just warning you now. Eleanor leaned against the counter, eyes twinkling. Perfect. We don't need symmetrical sugar to be happy. Naomi opened her mouth like she was about to argue, then shut it again. You know, I used to think baking was about control, timing, measurements, rules. And now? Naomi leaned on the counter beside her. Now I think it's just about showing up. Eleanor looked at her for a moment. That's what family is, too. They stood like that for a while, the smell of butter and vanilla creeping through the room, warm and slightly too rich. Naomi reached for the bowl of leftover frosting and swiped a crooked spoonful onto a cooling cookie. It dripped down the side like a mess no one wanted to fix. Want to try? She asked. Eleanor hesitated. It looks like a crime scene. Naomi grinned. Exactly. She handed over the cookie. Eleanor took a bite and coughed once. Too much cinnamon. They burst into laughter. And not the polite, porch-approved kind. The real, tear up at the corners, can't stop once you start kind. When they finally caught their breath, Naomi sat down on a stool, legs tucked beneath her like she used to do as a kid, though she'd never had a kitchen like this back then. She looked around the room, at the cooled cookies, the framed family photos, new ones. The window opened just an inch, letting in the scent of rosemary from the garden. This, Naomi said softly, is what family feels like. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She just reached over and dabbed a smear of frosting off Naomi's cheek with the edge of a napkin. I know, she whispered. The courtroom was smaller than the others. No oak-paneled walls, no stern judges in robes. Just soft lighting, a U.S. flag in the corner, and a round wooden table surrounded by chairs that squeaked when you shifted too much. Eleanor sat at the head of the table in a navy wool dress, hair pinned back. Her hands were folded neatly on top of the file in front of her. It held 2 sets of documents, the finalized estate amendment, and something else. Naomi paced near the door, too nervous to sit, her heels clicking softly across the linoleum floor. Will she say no? She asked. Will, seated across from Eleanor, looked up from his folder. This judge? No. Not unless one of you starts shouting in Latin. That could still happen, Naomi muttered. The door opened. Judge Melody Keene entered, brisk but kind-eyed. Let's make it official, ladies. They all stood. then sat. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of protocol, signatures, notarizations. At one point, Naomi asked if she was supposed to raise her right hand. Judge Keene smiled and said, "Only if you're testifying you'll still call her on weekends." Everyone laughed, except Eleanor, whose expression didn't shift until the judge pushed the final paper across the table. A single line stood at the top, in crisp black print. Legal adult adoption. Eleanor Ann Pierce. Naomi Grace. Bright Pierce. Eleanor reached for the pen. She didn't hesitate. She signed, then turned the document around and slid it to Naomi. Naomi stared at it. For once, she was completely still. Then she signed, and the ink smeared slightly under her shaking hand. The judge smiled. "Congratulations, it's done." Naomi blinked fast. "So that's it?" "Legally, yes." "Emotionally, I assume you've been there for a while," Judge Keene said, rising. The gavel was small, more ceremonial than judicial. Still, it echoed. Naomi stood, took one step toward Eleanor, and collapsed into her arms. No performative crying, no camera-ready tears. Just a full, wordless sob from a grown woman who'd never expected to be anyone's daughter again. Eleanor held her, one arm around her back, the other smoothing her hair like she had when Darren was little, before legacy meant paperwork and distance. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've always had you." By noon, the Lexington Gazette had the exclusive. Front page, top fold. Local philanthropist finalizes adult adoption, cementing chosen family legacy. A color photo of Eleanor and Naomi standing outside the courthouse, arms around each other, eyes still red, sat beneath the headline. The article read like a celebration. It detailed Eleanor's estate transformation, the new mentorship foundation, and the formal adoption of Naomi Grace Bright Pierce as her full legal daughter and heir. It quoted Will Novak calling it, "the most emotionally grounded estate case I've handled in 20 years. They ran a side column titled, "What is Adult Adoption and Why It's Changing the Way We Define Family?" Darren read the article at 3:12 p.m. He didn't find it on purpose. It popped up in his news app under Trending Lexington. He didn't speak, didn't throw the phone, didn't text Madison. She wouldn't answer anyway. He just stared at the image for a full 5 minutes, then exited the app, deleted it, and sat in silence so thick he could hear the hum of the fridge. His last name still sat on his driver's license. But that was all he had left of it. 3 days later, Will invited Eleanor and Naomi to brunch. They thought it was to sign foundation paperwork. Instead, when they arrived at the little rustic cafe on the edge of town, the one with the mismatched mugs and garden herbs growing in cracked teapots, they found the back patio reserved. String lights overhead. A small banner strung between two wooden beams. "Congratulations, Naomi. Welcome home." Marge was already seated with a mimosa in one hand. "I didn't even know this place took reservations," Eleanor muttered. "They don't," Will said. "But I threatened to rewrite their lease." Naomi laughed, then paused, eyes scanning the table. There were envelopes, cards, one from the mayor's office, one from a group of former foster parents who knew her from years back, one from a girl in the mentorship program that simply read, "Thank you for giving me proof good people win sometimes." Naomi sat slowly, staring down at the seat. Eleanor pulled it out for her. Naomi looked up, voice barely a whisper. "This doesn't feel real." Eleanor leaned in. "Then we'll keep doing it until it does." Naomi walked the gravel path barefoot, her notebook tucked under one arm. The morning was soft, the kind of morning that didn't insist on anything. Dew clung to the lavender bushes, and a low mist curled around the edges of the rose beds. Somewhere in the distance, someone was already unloading folding chairs for the gala. But for now, it was quiet. She paused beside the corner of the property where the oldest tree stood, a sprawling sycamore with roots that cracked the earth like memory. From her coat pocket, she pulled a pen, flipped open the journal, and began to write. Phase 2. Expand mentorship program. Add arts track. Long-term greenhouse restoration, sculpture garden, maybe in the back orchard. Legacy. Growth, not control. She underlined the last line twice, then looked up to where Eleanor sat beneath the canopy. The old bench had been sanded and sealed last spring, but the brass plaque mounted to it remained untouched. Naomi walked over slowly, letting the leaves crunch under her feet. Eleanor didn't look up. She sat with her hands resting on her lap, eyes half closed, a shawl draped over her shoulders. The plaque beside her caught the light. Home is who you love, not who you birth. H.P. Naomi traced the edge of it with her finger. Did you write the quote, or did he? She asked softly. Eleanor's lips curved. He said it. Once, when Darren was 2 and I was convinced I'd ruined motherhood forever. Naomi sat beside her. And now? Eleanor reached over and squeezed her hand. Now I know better. By late afternoon, the bright legacy home had been transformed. Lanterns hung from tree branches. A trio of high school musicians played jazz standards near the fountain. Tables were scattered across the lawn with soft cream linens, handwritten place cards, and centerpieces of clipped garden stems in mason jars. Naomi stood near the entrance, checking the catering list one last time. Her dress was a simple navy A-line, her hair pulled back with a pin shaped like a compass, a quiet nod to Eleanor's favorite brooch. Guests began to arrive just before sunset. Donors, community leaders, parents from the mentorship program. Girls from the garden crew wearing matching blazers and shy smiles. Each one stopped at the photo board Naomi had assembled. Snapshots of Eleanor through the decades, intercut with Polaroids of the girls learning to plant, bake, dream. At the center was a single frame, a photo from the adoption day. 2 women standing outside a courthouse, arms locked, smiling like the past had been rewritten by hand. Will took the stage first. He cleared his throat, looked out over the crowd, and said, "There are a few times in a lawyer's life when the work doesn't feel like paperwork. This was one." He paused. Tonight isn't about litigation or inheritance or correcting the past. It's about lineage, chosen, protected, and honored. He turned toward Naomi. She didn't receive a legacy. She built one. His voice cracked slightly. And some of us were lucky enough to watch. Applause rose like a gentle tide. Naomi looked down, blinking fast. Marge raised a glass next. She didn't have notes. She never did. "I've seen a lot of families," she said, standing tall in her floral dress and garden boots. Some bonded by blood, some by time, some just because they refused to quit on each other. She glanced toward Eleanor and Naomi. Here's to the daughters we choose, and the mothers who let themselves choose back. The entire lawn stood with her. As dusk settled in, the fairy lights flickered on, and the music slowed. Naomi walked to the garden's edge, far enough to hear the crickets again. Eleanor found her there, just as she had so many nights before, saying nothing. Naomi turned, her eyes wet. "I never thought my name would mean something to someone else." Eleanor pulled her into an embrace. "It means something to me," she whispered, "and it always will." Behind them, laughter rose again. Glasses clinked. Stories were traded. A future was being spoken aloud. And in a dark apartment 2 counties away, Darren clicked through the photos from the gala that flooded his feed. Everyone featured Naomi. Every caption referenced legacy. Not one included his name. He scrolled back, refreshed, clicked, typed, stopped, and shut the laptop. The study still smelled like cedar and ink. It was the room Eleanor hadn't entered at night in nearly a decade. She kept it clean, of course, dusted, ventilated, but not lived in. Not since Harold's passing. Not since grief had turned the corners too sharp to sit in. But tonight, she lit candles. One by one, tall tapers in iron sconces, a cinnamon pillar in the corner, and a single tea light on Harold's old desk. The glow rose gently, not demanding, just returning. The wind outside nudged the shutters. Not cold, just present. Behind her, Naomi stepped in quietly, cradling a restored leather photo album in both hands. "Found the last one," she said. "The one that used to be water damaged. I fixed the page as best I could." Eleanor turned, nodding. "Let's see." They sat side by side on the study couch, Eleanor with her legs tucked beneath her, Naomi cross-legged, still barefoot from the gala cleanup. She opened the album gently. Inside, black and white wedding portraits, candid snapshots of garden parties, Harold teaching Eleanor how to fix a garden fence, a photo of the piano, freshly tuned. Then one of Naomi, arms around two mentees, all of them grinning in sun hats. The next page held space. Naomi pulled 3 new prints from her pocket, still warm from the printer. One was the gala photo. Another showed Eleanor laughing at a community luncheon, face unguarded, radiant. And the third was a simple image of the plaque outside, the new name. Naomi set them in the slots. When she was done, Eleanor placed her hand on the page. "Now it's whole." They stood. Naomi reached for the hammer hanging by the study door and handed it over. Together, they moved into the hallway, the long stretch that once displayed only traditional portraits, Darren's school photos, and black and gold family seals. Most of those were gone now. In their place, new frames, Naomi in the garden with the first class of girls. Eleanor teaching them to prune, Marge holding up a lemon tart in triumph. Will caught mid-laugh beside a pile of scholarship applications. The hallway no longer declared power. It showed life. At the far end, the light fixture flickered softly as Naomi stepped back, eyeing the final arrangement. "I think that's all of them." Eleanor nodded. "Good." She turned, walking down the hallway toward the door that hadn't been touched since the second petition. Darren's old room. The door was still painted navy, the brass knob cold. Eleanor rested her hand on it for a long moment. She opened it. Inside, neat shelves, packed boxes. A room frozen in time by someone who hadn't respected it enough to preserve it himself. The bed still made, but never visited. Eleanor didn't step inside. She reached behind the door and pulled it shut, then locked it. She didn't say anything as she walked away, just turned toward Naomi and gave a quiet nod. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the wind chimes hanging near the porch. The same ones Harold had bought from a craftsman on their 25th anniversary trip to Asheville. They sang like memory, soft, imperfect, unpolished, but real. Inside, the whole house glowed, not with chandeliers or polished brass, but with candlelight, stories, and warmth that couldn't be faked. There was nothing left untouched now, nothing left unsaid. Eleanor walked back into the study, paused at the doorway and looked around. The shelves of books, the framed foundation certificate, the photo albums stacked on the table, the compass brooch resting in the dish beside her glasses. Naomi followed her in, arms crossed gently over her chest. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "It's strange," she said, voice low. "He took the name for himself." She paused, then finished. "So I gave it to someone who honored it. And for the first time in years, the room didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a home."